Hi, I'm Ryan F. Gassian, and this is Canada and the World, a progressive channel devoted to Canadian and world politics. I will be tackling some of the most controversial issues of the day, with an emphasis about how it will affect Canadians. Please support my channel by subscribing and hitting the like button below. Remember, if you press the little bell, you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now, if you picked up the Toronto Star recently, you might have heard about the crisis unfolding in Toronto. The one created when Premier Doug Ford decided to use the notwithstanding clause to restructure the size of the electoral map from 47 wards down to 25. In this video, I will be discussing what the notwithstanding clause is and what Ford's action means for the future of Canadian politics. This October, Torontonians are set to go to the polls and vote for their representatives on City Council. Things were fine until September 12th, a little over a month before the elections, when Doug Ford and his Conservative buddies passed Bill 31, the Efficient Local Government Act, which cuts the number of city wards from 47 to 25. City Clerk Ulia Watkis says she's unsure whether she can meet the October 22nd deadline, and she thinks the elections should be postponed. Even if the elections went on scheduled, one constitutional scholar believes that the next city council might be considered unconstitutional, meaning that any action it takes could be challenged in court. Ford, by passing this legislation, has thrown a monkey wrench into the works. But the question is, why did he do it? And why right before an election? 4 years ago, Ford's brother Rob was the mayor of Toronto, and Ford was his right-hand man. He supported Rob even as he was being criticized for smoking cocaine. After being diagnosed with cancer, his brother stepped down and Doug ran in his place. He would go on to lose the election to Toronto's current mayor, John Tory. Ford claims that the change in the number of councillors was made to cut costs and improve accountability. Yet given the timing of the move, being so close to an election, it looks like it might have been done as an act of spite, a jab of the knife into John Tory's gut, so to speak. After all, if Ford was truly doing this to save money and increase accountability, he could have stipulated that these changes didn't come into effect until the 2022 election. He would still have achieved his goals without unleashing chaos. Worse, he had already been told by the courts not to. His attempts to change the number of Toronto wards began in August with the passage of the Better Local Government Act. That act was immediately challenged and ultimately made its way to Ontario's Supreme Court. By September 10th, Justice Edward Bellabob had declared that the act violated constitutional rights, specifically those under Section 2B. Section 2B deals with the freedom of expression, and the courts ruled that since candidates were already campaigning, making these changes now would unjustly muffle their voices by removing some from the race. 2 days later, Ford used his majority to circumvent the judge's ruling via the notwithstanding clause. It is hard to see, again, given the extraordinary measures the Premier has taken, that this is anything less than a flagrant abuse of power. Yet when you examine Ford's history, it doesn't seem out of character. Many have compared Ford to US President Donald Trump, and it seems more and more that such a comparison is warranted. Like Trump, Ford is a bombastic showman who often exaggerates the truth. He styles himself as a right-wing populist, often presenting himself as the only one willing to stand up for the little guy. This style of politics has garnered him a rabid and loyal following, something I've learned since starting my YouTube channel. Seriously. The only people messaging me are Ford supporters, and then all they have to say is how stupid I am. Yet, with this move, I think Ford has revealed his true colors, showing that he shares another trait with Trump. He's an authoritarian. An authoritarian is someone who demands strict obedience to authority, often at the expense of other people's personal liberties. He claims that by subverting democratic norms, he is protecting these norms. For example, Ford argues that having fewer counselors will make government more efficient by shortening debates. Somehow, this would also improve accountability, as well as save the city $25 million. I don't know how much money it will save the city, but I do know it will reduce the number of points of views that are presented during debates, as well as increase the workload for the remaining counselors and their staffs. Increasing workloads typically increases inefficiency. Now, this could be overcome if you double the number of staffs for each counselors, but there is no indication that Ford would ever do such a thing since he wants to save money. This is more akin to firing half the teachers at a school and increasing class sizes, and then proclaiming that you've made it easier for the remaining teachers to devote more time to their students. This kind of logic is an example of doublethink, a falsehood told to justify an action that goes counter to the objective stated. We saw something similar when Trump used national security to defend slapping tariffs on Canadian steel. Canada was in no way a threat to the United States, nor did placing those tariffs make America safer. In fact, by insulting a close ally, Trump has made the US less safe. But by saying it aloud, Trump decides that Congress, just as Ford used the notwithstanding clause to ignore a judge's orders. The question we must ask ourselves, how can the notwithstanding clause allow Ford to strike down a constitutional right? The notwithstanding clause has been around since April 1982, when the Charter of Rights and Freedom was given royal assent. Like the Bill of Rights in the United States, the Charter offered constitutional protections to certain rights, including freedom of expression and freedom from search and seizure. However, unlike the Bill of Rights, it had Section 33, a provision which gave Parliament or provincial legislators the power to override certain portions of the Charter. There were clear limitations placed on this power. A right could only be overturned for 5 years, though the clause could be invoked indefinitely. The idea behind this was that 5 years was the longest Parliament could go without an election, so if people were unhappy with whatever right had been rescinded, they could vote a new Parliament in to change it. Of course, certain rights, specifically those rights that guaranteed voters the right to vote out the current Parliament, could not be overturned. As absurd as the idea that government has the power to veto constitutionally guaranteed rights might seem today, the fact of the matter is that if the notwithstanding clause hadn't been added, we might have had no rights. Until 1982, Canada didn't have a written constitution. We didn't even have a formula on how to draft one. And it took Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau a lot of convincing to persuade Canada's premiers to adopt one. Naturally, concessions were made, which would later become known as the Kitchen Accords, named after a meeting that took place in a kitchen between Justice Minister John Cruikshank and 2 provincial ministers. Both were made to reassure the provinces, who feared losing much of their power under the new constitution. These compromises added 2 new provisions to the proposed charter, the notwithstanding clause, and an amendment formula that would allow future changes to the new constitution. Its supporters argued that the notwithstanding clause also acted as a safeguard against the Supreme Court, should it rule that hate speech should be protected under freedom of expression. It was hardly perfect, and Trudeau lamented as much, but it was necessary at the time. In its history, the notwithstanding clause has only been used 5 times, so long as you don't count the time between 1982 and 1987, when the Quebec government placed it in every legislation it passed, regardless if it made sense or not. Quebec never signed the charter, and invoking the clause was their way of giving the federal government the middle finger. Still, in every other case, it was used sparingly and as a matter of last resort. What Ford has done is very different. The health of a democracy is determined by the willingness of everyone in it to abide by certain norms. Some norms are codified into law and backed up by force, but most function on an honor system. For example, you don't have to be elected to become Canada's Prime Minister, just the leader of the ruling party. But today, all Canadians agree that it would be undemocratic for a Prime Minister to not also be an MP. Section 33 doesn't specify how frequently the notwithstanding clause should be used, but most agree that it should be used sparingly. Just like you should only pull the fire alarm when there's a fire, and not because you're bored and you think it would be funny to see people stampeding to the exit. Understand, norms change over time, and that's why what Ford did is so disturbing. He's already on the record saying that he's considering to use it again. The notwithstanding clause shouldn't be some writ large a premier can whip out whenever he finds the Constitution or a court ruling inconvenient, especially if he's doing it to get back at his political opponents. If Ford gets away with this, do you think future premiers won't do the same? And if that becomes the new norms, what does that mean for the Charter of Right and Freedom if politicians can simply ignore it? So, do you agree with my analysis? Or do you think Ford is in the right? Please let me know in the comment section below, and please hit the subscribe button, as well as give me a like. Oh, and please visit my website, www.darknessinamerica.com, where you can read short stories that take place before my upcoming novel, Darkness in America. My story is about a future United States, where people live in fear of inquisitors, telepathic assassins who police the populace for thought crimes.